Thank you very much for hosting. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everyone, although I'm having trouble with that. But I've been in Vermont for 17 years. I've been in the legal field for 26 years. I've worked as a paralegal for trial attorneys, both in New Jersey, where I lived before, and here in Vermont, in Woodstock, and currently in West Windsor. And I am very passionate about the law, and I feel that the work as an assistant side judge is very worthwhile work. To help in family court, to help in civil court. And of course, I take very seriously the administration of the county budget. I look forward to working with everyone involved in representing the people of the county.
Great. That is great. I'm hesitant to ask you any questions, but if anyone else has we'll take one question for Alison. If you're, well, until you just say no mas, but feel free, the rest of the room, while Alison is with us.
Alison, do you have a web page? Do you have a website?
I do not have a website, no.
Okay.
I just didn't feel it's, obviously there's a campaign involved, but it's not a political position. So I just didn't feel, I felt like I was going to get a lot of questions that were unrelated to what my position would be.
Gotcha.
Thank you for stepping up and running.
Thank you.
I'm happy to. I've been very active in the community. I've volunteered for various organizations, so I feel very connected to the community. I'm very fortunate to be part of it.
Also running for that position is Michael Ricci, who a little bit about yourself and your background, and you've been you moved into that role. What was it, last year, a year ago, a year and a half?
It's almost a year.
Almost a year. So tell us about that and what your experience has been like so far.
Okay.
Off of that.
I like to say we never see people at their best. The majority of the work that we do is in family and civil court. I can tell you I start every Monday morning in White River Junction at 8 a.m. hearing relief from abuse cases. So this morning, I think we heard 8 cases in relief from abuse. The first portion is people seeking the first order, and the second portion of the session is for people trying to renew an existing order. And
this is spousal abuse, Michael, or parental, or something in that.
Any family member.
Any family member. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then so that's our Mondays, and we do divorces and child custody cases. That's a good portion of Wednesday and Thursday. And we also sit on civil. The majority of the civil that we do are some bench trials and stalking, which is similar to relief from abuse, but it's for unrelated people.
I got you. So it could be at work, it could be just out at a restaurant or whatever. Yeah.
Well,
gotcha.
most of them seem to be neighbors.
Ah, neighbors.
Yeah.
Great. And you've enjoyed it. You've found it.
I'm going to say I don't use the word enjoy.
Right.
I find it satisfying. I really think that we're making a difference, and the group of people that we work with are really outstanding.
Great to hear.
Yeah, and they've been very welcoming. I worried about how judges feel about, the side judges, and the sort of work that we're doing. We all have a different take on it, and we all appreciate the experience that other people are bringing to it to come to what is the best decision, you know, say in a divorce for the children or for the people filing for abuse cases. So the judges have been very, very welcoming, and I have stated that they so appreciate our opinion.
New to, again, to the system to some extent, and I'm curious, what does a side job, what is their responsibility for the side judge necessarily? Do you take over the role that the judge would be, let's say, in an abuse case? Because interestingly, many years ago in 1984, my ex-husband was emotionally and psychologically abusive. And I ultimately had to go to, this is down in Newark, New Jersey. I lived in South Orange, and I had to go to a court and then present myself to the judge so that I could get a restraining order. And it was a very difficult situation for those people. Now, I was working and I was successful, but he was that way. And it was very intimidating for many people. Do you help offset that experience for them? I mean, is that what you're doing?
You know, you have some great questions there. Let me tell you what side judges' responsibilities are. We are finders of fact. So if you had to think about it, we serve as the jury. We have an equal vote with the judge. The judge sits with two, you know, one or two side judges. There's two in each county. And we have an equal vote with them on who's more credible, who has the preponderance of evidence in their favor. And the judge makes rulings of law. And we, between the three of us, make the decisions on, you know, who is more credible and whether or not to issue the order that's requested. In addition to that, we do we are the county administrators. So I was lucky enough to prepare the budget this year for Windsor County. And we oversee all the payments and hire and supervise the county staff, who are outstanding, by the way.
Great.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And also, as a result, are there people who within your area that help women or who's ever being abused through the system so that they're not afraid to deal with the system?
That's another great question. WISE opens each morning and counsels folks about what to expect, and you know, sets some expectations and calms people down, and they do a great job as well.
Oh, that's great to hear.
Each of us knows that most of these people who appear before us are unrepresented, and you give people enough leeway, you know, within the law to make sure that we're getting to all the facts. So, and do so in, I think, you know, a sensitive way.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you.
Al, just to mention, we've attempted, both you and I and a number of people have tried to get David Singer, who is the third person that is running. David, the little I can say about is that he had held the position a number of years ago and stepped down, and he put his name up again. I've learned more in this short time about what the side judges or assistant judges do. It's very interesting. I know that Joyce McKeeman, who is a friend of mine, is the side judge, assistant judge up in Orange County, and who heads the group of side judges. And it's a very important role, and they're busy a lot.
Yeah, that's great. I guess I could add the one other area, Michael and Alison, to whatever degree you'd want to at least nod your head in and so forth. But there is that management of the county finances, and that includes the sheriff's department or not? What is your, how do you relate with the sheriff's department from that perspective?
Would you like me to take that one, or?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
unless Allison wants to.
Let's save Allison's voice, if that's
Yeah.
okay with everyone. And if you disagree with me, Allison, just
Use your hand. Yeah,
give me
use
a
the hand.
sign.
Yeah.
So we do prepare the entire budget, including the sheriff's department. There are statutory limits on what we can fund for the sheriff. So we have to be very careful of that and make sure that the sheriff is spending money appropriately and using county money for the things that we can statutorily give him funding for. So we prepare the budget, we oversee every single payment. Spent this week negotiating with the elevator repair folks. I mean, it goes down to
that
many
level.
things. Yeah, I mean, we literally have an elevator that wasn't working and are doing jury draws, and to be, ADA accessible, we need that elevator going. So, yeah.
Great. Well, that's the part that I think we tend to overlook, is that
Right.
there's just, there isn't a lot of county government, but you two or whoever the two are a big part of that. So I think that's a good aspect to be aware of.
As an example, the big opioid settlement that was just reached is being distributed in every other state by the county. And part of my, I think I was not going to accept the appointment if we were going to be responsible for spending something like 20 times our annual budget in a way that, we have no infrastructure for the county to do any of those things. So luckily, we are not in charge of that.
Well, I just wanted to add that we also would work with the county clerk as well, and have meetings with the clerk with regard to the budget.
The county clerk,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
The clerk and treasurer. In our county, it's one person, and there's one assistant who does the assistant for each of those positions as well. Thank you, Allison. And we have one building superintendent who takes care of the courthouse, and our offices are in the county building, the old county jail.
Jail.
The one in Woodstock.
Yeah, by Maple Fields. Yeah.
By Maple Fields. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both for that, for the interest of moving along. I want to move to Mike Pieciak. I'm probably not saying your name correctly.
Mike Pieciak.
Pieciak. Thank you. My apologies for that. But Mike is running for the state treasurer position, and following in the large footprints of Beth Pierce, who is there, I don't forget how many years, but welcome to that, and tell us a bit about yourself. And people don't just up and decide to run for that kind of a position. So you have clearly a good background in things that have dollar signs and so forth related to them. So
Mike was also involved with the COVID response on Governor Scott's team.
Great. Well done. Well played. Go ahead, Mike. It's yours.
Hey, well, thank you very much. And yeah, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having me, letting me spend some time with you, and look forward to the conversation. Happy to answer any questions that you have as well. And don't worry, my parents pronounce my last name different than each other, so there's plenty of room for interpretation. And actually, I pronounce it differently than both of them as well. So, so that says something, I guess. But I grew up in Brattleboro, Vermont. My parents still live there, as well as my extended family. My mom and dad really, instilled a sense of public service into me when I was growing up. They did it in different ways. My mom founded a soup kitchen when she was pregnant with me 40 years ago, and still runs it today. She's in her mid 70s, and my dad is a CPA. He's still working at a CPA firm still now in his late 70s. You know, my mom in that, through that work and on more of the social justice side, my dad more in the community engagement, you know, helping found the teen center in Brattleboro, helping expand the golf course in Brattleboro, helping bring lights to the football field in Brattleboro, all these sort of community engagements that both of them did, and really were their sort of life work, their real passions in their lives in terms of giving back to the community. So that really was hard not to have an impact on me growing up. And the other thing that they did that had an impact on me was that my mom is a Democrat and my dad is a Republican. So they watch TV in different rooms. I can certainly tell you that. But it is something of a blessing in some ways in this really polarized world to be able to have two people that you care about so much be of different ends of the spectrum. I maybe was influenced more by my dad when I was more impressionable when I was younger, but as my judgment got better, I certainly landed more on my mom's side of the political spectrum. But like I said, I think it's important, you know, that we continue to engage and talk to each other in these polarized times. I don't know what the answer is to become less polarized, but I don't think it's to retreat into our corners and, you know, throw barbs at the other side. But, you know, there's a lot of work to do across the country. Fortunately, here in Vermont, we have a much more, easy way of getting along with each other, particularly on different political spectrums and different political ideologies. But so after growing up in Brattleboro, I went away for school. I went to Union College in Schenectady, New York. I went to law school down in Miami. When I was done with law school, I worked in New York City for about 3 years in total at a law firm there doing mergers and acquisitions work. When I came back to Vermont about 8.5 years ago, I was the deputy commissioner at our Department of Financial Regulation. I was the deputy of the Securities Division specifically. In that role, I was tasked with investigating the J-Peak fraud, if everyone remembers that, back in 2007, but 2015 into 2016. So our department really delved into that. We reviewed, 150,000 financial transactions, 100,000 pages of financial materials to put together what sort of came out of that as the spaghetti map, if you remember that, in terms of showing where the flow of funds were in terms of those projects, and ultimately, fortunately, too, bringing a case that was successfully settled in the state's favor, and helping the SEC and helping the U.S. Attorney bring their cases as well for civil and criminal charges. After that case was over, I was promoted to the commissioner under Governor Shumlin in 2016. Governor Scott came in and held me over in 2016. So I've worked for, different governors of political stripes. I think like I said, my upbringing, working with my mom and my dad helped me out in that, my professional life as well. But at our department, we regulate banks, insurance companies, credit unions, investment firms, captive insurance companies as well. And we always have a very consumer-oriented mindset at our department. We want to make sure Vermonters are getting the full benefit of their bargain. We want to make sure when they enter into a life insurance agreement that company is solvent and around to make good on that promise, that the companies are following the laws. And when they're not, we bring enforcement actions and get restitution for Vermonters. So over the 6 years that I was commissioner, we brought in about $13 million in penalties and restitutions for Vermonters. We also worked with our industries to try to improve things in the business climate. For example, we lowered worker compensation rates over our 6 years there by close to 50%. It was a pretty dramatic decrease over the last 6 years. And we did that both by taking a new look at sort of the risks that were presented, by building programs that reduce the risk for workers and for businesses. And also some of that was just the natural trend of what's happening in the space of worker compensation insurance. But that's really a really challenging expense for small businesses. So we find opportunities like that at the department to partner with the businesses and the entities that we regulate to try to improve the climate for them to be able to do business here in Vermont. And then as Dottie said, for the last 2 years, prior to my announcing for running for treasurer, I worked on the governor's COVID-19 task force, presenting the data and the analyzing the COVID stats for the last, for the 2 years of the pandemic that were, from March until just when I left in May. So that certainly was a challenging time for all of us here in Vermont. Fortunate to be largely past that, although we're living with COVID still to this day. And then when Beth announced her retirement in May of this year, I announced that I would be running to succeed her. I was very happy to have Beth's endorsement. She was at my announcement and endorsed me, which meant a lot for me because she is very well respected. And I've really, one of the truths I've learned going around the stage is that truth, that she is very well respected among Democrats, but really among all Vermonters that have had to engage with her and just know anything about her and her work. So we're off and running in the campaign. We're planning to visit every single town in Vermont. We're doing the 251, now 252 town tour. I think we have more towns to go than we've finished, but we're quite a long ways along that tour at this point. But the reason I wanted to run for treasurer ultimately, the direct responsibilities of the office that I think are critical, ensuring the pensions are secure and they'll be there for this generation and the next generation for our teachers and state employees, making sure that teachers and state employees understand the retirement benefits that are given to them in the Retirement Services Division, the Unclaimed Property Division, returning money back to Vermonters, cash management, making sure the state has money on hand to pay its bills. But ultimately, when you think about the credit rating and the bond rating that the state has, they point out that Vermont has unfunded liabilities relative to the pension fund. So that's certainly something to focus on. But they also point out the demographic issues in the state and the fact that we're a state that's getting older, our workforce is getting smaller, and that is causing some sort of structural pressures on our budget and on our economy. And I think two of the ways that we really can help unlock that full potential of our economy is continuing to put effort into affordable housing. And that's the traditional affordable housing, but generally just housing across the board, whether it's first-time home buyers, whether it's elderly housing, all of those things will free up housing stock across the spectrum. And then also childcare. Both of those issues, when you talk to employers across the state, they say, I'd love to move into a second location or expand my product line or do something different. But I can't find workers because those workers can't find housing or they can't find childcare. It's literally handcuffing our economy, those two issues in particular. So, there's work to do there. There's work to do on climate as well, climate resiliency in particular. I think the Treasurer's Office can have a direct and an indirect role on that. The direct role, there are funds available in the local investing funds to make strategic investments. There's bonding capacity at the state, again, for strategic investments. But then there's also the indirect role of just, being able to be an advocate in the legislature and a sounding board on these critical economic issues as well. So I would hope to take full advantage of both of those, the direct and indirect roles of the office, and be quite active in those conversations. So I think I'll end there unless there are any questions either about the office or why I'm running or myself, but happy to answer any of those.
And that was great.
I see Lynn, I think, has.
Go ahead.
Thank you. As the spouse of a state retiree, thank you very much for your work on the pensions. I was very happy to see the unanimous override of the governor's veto. It just makes me feel better to know that Vermont is following our laws and has concern for our people.
Yeah, Lynn, the pension situation was a real challenge for, as you know, even those that were retired and they weren't really at risk, but it's still a challenging topic. And particularly those though in the workforce. You hear employees who were 10 years away from retirement, right? In the middle of a pandemic, where they're having to do more than they've ever done in their careers. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, you got to work for another 7 years. It just really was, that one in particular was a challenge for employees. But in any event, we had the pension task force and wasn't super optimistic at the beginning, but just like anything else, when you sort of think through the issues in a thoughtful way, when you sort of compile all the information, when everybody tries to find a solution, tries to figure out something that can help people, we ended up getting to some recommendations that I think really help shore the pension up. There's more work to be done, and we got to keep a close eye on that. We don't want anything to, be a surprise ever again. We don't want things to get out of control when we can make hopefully small improvements to keep things on pace. But in any event, I was really happy that in the face of an election year, in the face of a pandemic, that we were able to come to some solid recommendations.
Yes. I heard
Great.
from another person who was on the pension committee who said very nice things about how you came to consensus.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think it was a process. It was a good result and a good process.
Yep. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else?
This is Dottie. I just wanted to, I'm putting an article that was in Vermont Biz magazine on Mike from June that really, if you want to click on that and just read sort of the nuts and bolts, I just want to put my 2 cents in. When I was chair of the party, and Mike was the campaign chair for Bill Sorrell, and this was when TJ Donovan was just starting up. And I wanted to just tell everyone that my impression and my knowledge of Mike is there's no one that can say a bad thing about him. He's a detailed, hard worker that really, really cares about Vermont, and being a Vermont native just is icing on the cake. And he's very, very well thought of in the Windham County, Brattleboro area, as well as the other counties.
Great to hear that.
Thank you, Dottie. I'm still paying Vermont Business Magazine for that article.
It's a good one.
Sure, that's not the case.
The history, I know we need to go to Brenda quickly, but I just want to say the history that Mike has grown, as he said, he has grown up in politics and working with so many. And I think we're very, very, very lucky to have him. We have to lose Beth. We're very lucky to have Mike.
Yep.
Well, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, and we do want to move forward to our next speaker. Welcome back. Great to see you, and great to see you step up and run for this position. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. And I'll get into the why a little bit later, but I'm going to start by saying that we can't just not fight for Vermonters. As Democrats, we have to stand up and rise up. There are things that are being vetoed on the most vulnerable people in this state. They are the things that impact my family and the families around me the most. And we're repetitively being told through vetoes and actually words in the press conference that our needs don't matter and that we should figure out how to get out of the situations we're in ourselves. And I'm not willing to accept that. And I hope that we as Democrats can figure out how not to accept it either. So I want to start though by saying that I didn't go into it necessarily thinking about, or maybe was in disbelief and denial of what would happen with the Supreme Court. And what I think is most poignant is that Proposition 5, which we all need to vote yes in November on, is not enough if we have a federal ban and the other civil liberties that are at risk of being eroded. We need someone who is proactive on those issues, who can build a coalition with other states around us to make sure we have a plan for what we will do. We need to be proactively working to make sure we won't extradite people who come here for abortions, doctors who perform them, or people who will help them. We need to proactively make sure that we'll continue to have access to contraception, and that I think pointedly, both Mike and I are in the LGBTQ community, that our rights, that marriage equality and other rights and transgender rights are not eroded further. And we need to figure out what our plan is to do that. And right now we have a wait and see governor, and we need a governor that is going to be proactive and fight for Vermonters ahead of what we know is coming from Washington, because this is not hyperbole, this is reality. And we need to make sure that we're ready for it when it comes. So I've been starting with that, even though that's not the beginning of what I was normally or planning to say in this race. So going back to where I started, on October 14th, I stood on the State House steps and said that I would not leave until the governor fully reinstated the GAO motel program, the emergency house people experiencing homelessness, until it was fully reinstated. I had no idea that I would be there for 27 nights and 28 days. I was vastly unaware, despite my empathy, of the suffering that took place when one is sleeping in the cold on the hard ground. I didn't know how hard it would be or how quickly my body and mind would begin to struggle when I was sleeping rough. While we were there, right up until that last day, until that 28th day, there were many people that thought that we could not win. And it was not easy, but we won. What I know is that the housing crisis, as Mike said, it did not start with COVID. It has been building for a long time. Our neighbors and community members have nowhere to go. That doesn't matter if you're experiencing homelessness or you're upper middle income. We met people while we were on the steps who were sleeping in their cars with their children, who were upper middle income because they could not get back into the housing market. We can't just put together a plan that looks good on paper. It has to meaningfully address need as assessed. It has to make strategic investments, and it has to handle everything from emergency housing to transitional housing and permanent housing, from rental regulations and protections to home ownership, from land use to transportation. And this plan has to center our most marginalized and include rural communities who are both last in line now to ever find permanent housing. Our communities are strongest when we use housing first models, which I think we all know by now. And there should be a long-term plan that follows data, an interim plan that supports being sheltered until there is enough housing, because we know these new builds aren't coming tomorrow, and a deep analysis to reconfigure our support systems to address the enormous barriers to accessing those systems. We started a hotline this year, and the calls we got, the majority of the calls, I expected them to be people with substance use disorder and people with severe mental illness. And I was wrong. Those folks deserve housing as well, but the majority of the calls we got, around 80%, were women and people with children. Those were the people that were falling through the cracks and found our hotline to help them get housed. We know that it's not a moral failure. We know that particularly our most vulnerable members of our communities are vulnerable to insecure housing, unhealthy housing, and unsafe housing. And yet we treat it like a moral failure. And every time the legislature tries to address it, and I work with them trying to address it over and over again, there's a veto threat on the table. And we need to recognize that the governor should not be using his veto pen to govern. The legislators, the people you send to Montpelier, are people who are willing to work with the governor to find a solution. Like Mike did on pensions, they are willing to sit down until the work is done. As many of you know, on March 8th of 2018, my nephew, Siegal, whose upbringing I was a big part of, died of an overdose. He was the son of my brother, who died just over 20 years before him, also while using heroin. They both suffered from severe bipolar disorder and severe trauma. And with 20 years between them, the supports were still not in place to make it possible for them to survive. Since then, I have traveled around the state and country to work on drug policy. For 3 years, I worked with elected leaders from all three parties to pass a science and data-driven policy to decriminalize buprenorphine, the life-saving medication for people with opioid use disorder. The governor and his administration resisted this policy despite the overwhelming evidence that it was safe and effective policy. The bill passed with huge amounts of tripartisan support, all but 19 votes in the House and all but 1 in the Senate. That made it impossible for it to do anything other than become law. That happened alongside families like my own who have buried their loved ones and people in active use and recovery. I didn't do it alone. It was an uphill battle, but we won. What I know is that we need to focus on harm reduction first, treatment and recovery on demand, including medically assisted treatment on demand, dual diagnosis support, and criminal justice reform. This year, a bill that followed that plan was introduced for the first time. In 2020 in Vermont, we ranked #1 in increase in overdoses in the entire country. And in 2021, we were in the top tier for the same and had the most overdose deaths in our history. And what's really astounding is where it, for the first time ever, the top of that increase was in our rural communities. When doing this work, I often feel as though I'm on a battlefield and people are dying all around me. And we have an administration digging their heels in on an issue that has real solutions. These deaths are preventable. They are in all of our communities. They matter. And we have got to stop the practice of walking off the battlefield while people around us are burying their children. We have to. They're human beings that are worthy of life, worthy of money being put into harm reduction measures to support them. The overdose crisis is not going away on its own, and we have to use data, science, and lived experience solutions to save lives. On that same note, we have to do the same to take bold climate action today and every day. We don't have time for half measures. Climate change disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable people in your community and mine. And we need to use comprehensive solutions. Today, we were endorsed by VPIRG Votes. We've also been endorsed by Vermont Conservation Voters and Sierra Club of Vermont, all of whom have worked incredibly hard on climate solutions and been incredibly frustrated by the inaction in the administration. We have to invest beyond electric vehicles and make sure our solutions are accessible to low and moderate income Vermonters, middle income Vermonters, and serving on the state of Vermont's Public Transit Advisory Commission. I have had a front row seat to the possibilities we have to expand public transit and what we have done and what we have not done. And I have to just note that I was able to ride the train on Friday, and I'm like a 5-year-old around trains, and it was wonderful, and we should do a lot more of train service. We have the opportunity, we just have to do the work. This year we had the opportunity to do make more change due to federal funding, but we have to ensure that that change follows us as as the money that we have goes back to our standard amount of revenue, and that we're fixing the issues in the economy, as Mike said, climate and childcare, that create real stopgaps in us building a stronger Vermont for everyone. The climate crisis can't wait. We're responsible to leave an earth that our children can survive in and care for the Vermont that we love so much. I want to just touch on our state employees and teachers who for 6 years have lived with a constant threat of their livelihood, whether it's a veto of the budget or an attack on their pensions. I want everyone to just take a minute and remember that in 2018, we had both an attack on the pensions and a veto on the budget. We had several vetoes on the budget actually in 2018. And at that point, the governor didn't want to use one-time money to pay our liability. And what I always say is that anyone in poverty knows that when you have one-time money, you use it to pay a bill that you could not have paid otherwise. Phil Scott claims that defined contribution would have been beneficial, but in fact, if anyone does an analysis, and you don't even have to move far, a simple Google search, there's been plenty of data to show you that defined contribution is neither good for state employees or the state itself. It is not what we need, and for no necessary reason, state employees and teachers were told by way of a veto pen that it was okay to put their pensions, their livelihood, and their retirement at risk. Throughout COVID, the constant attacks on our teachers and schools, the leaving behind of the most vulnerable, the pressure on our state employees, the threat of a veto budget that would harm them in the short and long term, and our educators and our state employees are heroes of our time, and we owe them more. We have to do better. The thing is that the COVID is a crisis that we all did face, but it was not the first crisis or the only crisis. There was already an overdose crisis. There was already a mental health crisis. There was already a climate crisis. There was already a housing crisis. And now we have a deep threat of erosion to our civil liberties. And we need leadership on those issues. We need a governor that understands those systems inside and out. One who has done the work on the ground with the people, in the legislature as an advocate, and within the systems. These are not new issues, and we need a governor that is ready to lead. I see those leaders every day in your community and in mine, around me. There are leaders all around us. And I know that when we work alongside one another, there is nothing we can't do. I'm here because I know that we have to do this together, and that a tough fight for the people of Vermont is a fight worth having. And it is going to be a really tough fight, but it isn't even close to the toughest one that I've had to face in my life. And I'm still standing. I know that we can do this together. I know that when we all decide to fight, there is a possibility of us winning, and win or lose, we have to ensure that the legislators that we send them up here can do the work that we're sending them there to do. And that means that we have to make this happen. And in order to do that, what I need most from all of you at this time is resources. I need you to make contributions, because we are at a point where we have to be ready on August 10th. We have had a slow month in July, being perfectly honest, because there's a lot of primaries around us that are very important and that we're all really engaged in. But on August 10th, I'm going to have to be ready to send out mailers. I'm going to have to be ready to get on TV. My team has to be, I have to be ready to hire several more staff. And so this is the moment when I need you all to jump in any way that you're able to dig deep what works for you and make that contribution. We will have need for volunteers and letters to the editor and all of those things as well. But right now, what we need the most is money. And so I hope Jacob has put that in the chat, and I'm asking you all to make a contribution today, and I'll take questions.
That's great. Thank you so much. Questions? Anyone? Good, Sally.
Yeah, hi, Brenda. First of all, I must tell you, I was excited that you were willing to do this, and no one else stood up. So that really is kudos to you for taking on a huge task. I did read your website and read all of the information. And again, not being an original Vermonter, which I guess is bad in this world.
Yeah, it is, Sally.
But whatever. The point I had is, one of the things that I have encountered here is a limited focus. And, you know, you're caught in Vermont between the concept of rural Vermont, picturesque communities, idyllic views, and progress. And one of the things you mentioned was about the regulations and the land management issues that exist, because, you know, there are people who want to do more, but they don't want to do anything to get to accept the change. And that is really critical. You know, what are you willing to do to have a 10-year and a 20-year and a 30-year plan that is willing to take on this mentality of idyllic country versus progress, community, investment, industry, and development?
Yeah, so first of all, what I want to say, one of my frustrations as an advocate is that we often look at short-term solutions and not long-term strategic plans. If we're looking at how we solve, for example, climate and land use, and we're not actually looking at what the long-term economic impact or cost is, or what the long-term economic savings is, sometimes I think it's very short-sighted that we do something that has a short-term benefit and doesn't actually solve the problem because the long-term cost is quite great. Sometimes we don't do something that has a short-term cost because it has a short-term cost, and instead of analyzing what the long-term economic benefit would be to our state and to the people of our state, when we should, and hopefully I'll be able to partner with Mike and even the auditor to do some of that in the legislature to ensure that we are making long-term strategic investments in the well-being of our state. Yes, we have to live within our means, but part of living within your means is making sure that the economic investment is something that sustains us for the long term. We constantly are spinning our wheels on a lot of issues because we do short-term solutions, and that has not always been 100% the case. That's partially happening because we have a governor that won't sign something that has the long-term economic benefit with the short-term cost because of a fear of raising revenue at all. And when he does things like create flatten the tax rate for now, not flatten it, flatten's the wrong word. Like say that he's not going to have the tax rates go up, the property tax rates go up, when in fact we could change the way we pay for education from property tax to a progressive income tax, and that would alleviate the burden across the board for homeowners, make it more possible to have homeowners, to have people buy homes. And in addition, it would create a situation where we would be actually lowering people's tax burden and putting more burden where it belongs, which is on the people who have more resources. And what I mean by more is a lot more, and there aren't a lot of those in our state. So we have to be really clear that that isn't where the majority of our revenue isn't going to come from taxing the rich, but people should still pay their fair share.
Absolutely. But again, it's also the issue, and I don't mean to speak, but it's having the concept of multiple housing. I mean, the towns that, we go in, everyone, you can't just have everyone have a single home plot. That's
Right.
never going to expand and provide enough housing. So accepting the fact that you can have townhouse communities or other kind of housing units, and it may not conform to the Act 250 or the Act, whatever it is that you've got, but it's going to expand your population, which brings more employees, which will bring more industry because there'll be more people to work.
And Act 250 has a we worked on it a little this past year, the legislature did, and that bill was vetoed, unfortunately, and it needs to be addressed all around in a lot of ways. And one of the things that we asked for was that there's more requirement for building closer to the town and city centers, which is better for the environment, and it's also better for low-income folks and people aging Vermonters as well. And it creates more possibility when we're building up instead of out as well. I live 20 minutes outside of my outside of Brattleboro. I like Mike, I didn't say this, but I grew up in Brattleboro, and I live 20 minutes north, and I live 20 minutes north in part because of how the cost of living in Brattleboro. However, the cost of commuting is extremely high. So I think that it's really important for us to realize that we do have to change the way we live in order to address both climate and the needs of Vermonters.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Anybody else? We've hit 8 o'clock. Certainly it's fine going over. Susan had it down for 8, but with time at the end. And I did have, Brenda, I did have the thought of, from an attack point of view in campaigning, governor veto or something like that and I've heard some of our current legislators really tee off on him for his brutal veto pen. It's just been awful.
I want to say I'm impressed that our legislators are actually saying that what really happens right now. I think that's one of the hard things for people who have run in the past, because people want to be able to work with him if he's there again. But the reality is he's not coming to the table anyways. And so we have to try. But I wanted to say that the thing that I found works with people who are, I should have probably added this. The thing that I found it works with people who are Phil Scott voters, who are Democrats, is, we can have the good things without the vetoes and with progress. And right in this moment in the world, good enough is not enough. We just have to do better. And I've had several Phil Scott voters say to me, you know what? You're right. We do have to do better. And it's almost like that simple message is really something that works, because for those folks, they don't necessarily want to think the negative things that are really happening and that are really hard for people that he's working with. I do a lot of work with people in the administration, and I'm not going to out any of them, but there's a lot of stress there, actually. Yeah. Well, and I won't I don't want to get too into that because
you don't have to list anybody. But I, it is a tough position you're in, because in the post-pandemic, there was relief. Well, not only post-pandemic, but post the craziness in our country. I think there's been a broad appreciation for that. He's not like that lady who's running for governor in Arizona. He's not like, all kinds of people that are out there. In Vermont did arguably, it was one of the five, but of course now we know that Mike had most to do with that, for being so excellent in the, no, I'm only teasing, Mike. Well, I'm not.
No, I think it's true.
But I think it's probably true. But he let Mike do what he does. And we, we did a phenomenal job in Vermont. And so there's I think there's a broad appreciation of we weren't part of that maelstrom of disease and psychological craziness. But that has to end. And of course, I don't know any Democrats personally that would vote. I can appreciate him and thank him for not messing up COVID. But I will never vote for a Republican, and I've never have, and I never will for the rest of my life. But it seems like that the gloves have to come off. You already have, I'm sure, but that's important that we say, okay, we appreciate it, but here's what's not working, and that's what I'm hearing from you.
Yes, and if anyone knows anything about me, I'm not going to hold back on the issues that matter the most in our state. The truth is that there are things we could do that would save people's lives that are being vetoed. And that to me is unacceptable. That alone, even if that was the only thing, is unacceptable when you have the power to do something different. And there is no part of me that's afraid of saying the truth. I'm super cautious, and people are saying governor veto, and I'm super cautious of making sure that it is about the issues, that it is the truth of what's happening, and that we're saying that the governor could do more and isn't choosing to. People then can draw their own conclusion about what that means. That's what we did on the steps. And on the steps, what we did was we chipped away at the narrative that was being pressed by using the person's personal story, who was with me, who had been experiencing homelessness, and my access to reporters, because of the work I had done running for office. And we, when we weren't getting press, we sent weekly letters to the governor and to the press about the letters and we just kept telling the story over and over again, and we did it in plain language, but really every time that there was something that he said, we took it apart. And I'll do the same thing on this campaign trail, so that at the very minimum, when we're done, he will not have somewhere to go on some of these issues that need to move, that cannot wait 2 more years. I will make, there isn't a bone in my body that doubts that I can at least do that, and maybe we can have a miracle win.
Brenda, I have a friend who talked to you already, and she calls him Stand Still Phil.
What is it?
Stand still, Phil. That's
Still.
that's actually a very accurate.
And I think you could use that somehow and say, you know, he is Stand Still Phil. I see a future. I know the problems and I would like to address them. And I would like to move on them, because that's what I do. I make things happen.
He also has never seen, honestly, he hasn't had to run against someone who's impacted by the vetoes. He hasn't had to run against somebody who buried a child they raised. You know, he hasn't had to run against somebody whose life hasn't gotten better under his, you know, under his management of the state. And I think that that's really meaningful, because when you can say out loud, the people around me still can't find childcare. The people around me still can't find housing. That's the majority of our communities. I'm a mom. The moms around me can't travel freely about the state, because if we travel freely about the country and retain our freedom, if you're still upholding the ideals of the Republican Party, you are upholding ideals that are preventing the freedom of the children, the young women that I've taught in my life, because they cannot travel about the country. Jacob, who is working for me right now, lives in Georgia. And
I'm sorry.
And the people can't travel to Georgia and retain their freedom right now. And so I think it's really important to note that we are not just okay in Vermont because we've done things right. If I can't move from one state to another and still be free, then I'm not free here either.
Right. Yeah, that's clear. That's a good point to make.
And then,
Well, yeah.
One other point too, because again, if you look at the election results from 2016 on for the governor, and it has gotten more and more predominantly red in these areas, and yet we're Democratic community and Biden was elected. So everybody's excuse was, oh, but Phil's a nice guy. Well, if you think Phil's a nice guy, then how come he did this? And if you think Phil's such a nice guy, why did he do that? You know, that's the point. Everybody thinks he's a nice guy, but he's not a nice guy. And he's a Republican and he's not a nice guy.
Well, except Mike's dad, who's very nice. And what I often say, because I was asked when I announced, do I think Phil Scott is a decent human being by P. Hirschfeld? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm outside of being governor. I don't know if he's the kind of guy that would sack my wood like a lot of my neighbors are. But the point is that he has a flawed idea of the issues that face Vermonters, and he's causing harm as a result. And that is the point. Whether or not he would stack my wood is not.
Right.
The point is whether or not he would let people freeze to death last winter. And I am here to tell you from 27 nights on the steps that if we weren't there, he may have.
Well,
and
this is all
a hard thing for people to hear, but it's the truth.
How much money do you need, Brenda? You said you need some resources.
Right.
What's your goal? You don't want to say?
Well,
it's hard to say that.
I won't say what my goal is, but I will say this, that we really, in order for us to get the endorsements we want right now, and which will help us bring in the money from the goal, we need to get to where we've raised $100,000. And for those of you that know me, I don't have my own personal Rolodex. So I don't have the $4,000 donors to reach out to myself when I'm struggling. I can't be like, hey, Would you give me the rest of that max out? I don't have a pure personal
Yeah,
people
yeah.
like that. So,
All right.
so we need people to dig a little deeper and help us get there. We're a little over halfway there. We had like I said, we had a rough month in July, but when we have been told by the endorsers that will help us bring in more money, that if we can get to $100,000 quickly, then we can get these endorsements.
Is
So it's,
the Progressive Party backing you? Do you have their support, or are they running their own candidate?
they're not gonna, I think, I don't know for sure, but my understanding is that that person is going to reject the nomination. They were just making sure that it wasn't that Chris Erickson again, and that it's mine if I want it.
Right.
I have mixed, because frankly, we all need to vote for me. All the Democrats need to vote for me, like very badly. So we need to change what happened last time.
Yep. All right, good. Well, that's good to know. And you did give a figure, which is out of my league as well, but I wish it wasn't, because I wish I had won that million, the ticket on Friday night. That would have been good.
But our donations are coming in, and quickly, actually, in the last week,
Good.
at $100 or $200 or $500 or $50 or $25 at a time.
Great to hear.
And so if you're not someone who can give $4,000, giving still is making, it is building up. It's just slower for me.
Good to hear. That's good.
Yeah.
But all right, that's a job for us, because I can only speak for me. Well, I mean, I speak a little bit for Windsor County Dems, but that's not how a Democratic committee works. I don't speak for the committee,
Right.
but I think the Vermont Democratic Party has to do well on the gubernatorial level without a doubt, and I think that's something that we have to pick up quickly. Get our marching orders clarified. So it was great to get to hear you tonight, and it was really a pleasure. And the rest, by the way, I was asked to point out that there are two of the assistant judges, so you get to vote for two. So just to be clear, Alison wasn't sure that was clear. Mike also gave a link, if you open your chat, which has their backgrounds on. It's a vote-usa-org link there. So, and then further down, Jacob included the donation link for I'm sorry, tongue-tied, for Brenda. And I was just reading. I can't read and talk at the same time, obviously.
I'm a little like that.
Well,
Yeah.
and
So-
Al, can I just ask, do you have any signs? Because on your website, I couldn't find a link to get that.
My website is done through the Progressive Change Committee, and we're having a little trouble getting the back end addressed right now. We're working on it, so it's done before the general election. But we do have lawn signs. Do you have the form, Jacob, that you can put in? And they will be, we're gonna be in Windsor County tomorrow, and so we will drop off some lawn signs at a friend's house, and then they'll be available there too. And she will, or someone will bring them around.
Have your friend get in touch with Susan or myself, or
What town?
one of us, and we'll get the word out through the county. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And
Thank you.
my logo's unforgettable, so you can it's been noted that you cannot forget it, and actually in the lawn sign it's much more prominent. That
I like the way the half of the end goes off of your arm like that. That's great.
That's from when I had a dance career, and that's a photo. That image was made from a photo. Of me
Oh, that's
dancing,
great.
actually.
That's great.
So,
Yeah, super.
yeah.
All right. Well, super. Thank you so much, Brenda, for joining us. And Alison and Michael and Mike, thank you all for sharing. It's been a great evening, and learned a lot.